Welcome back to Be from Brussels. Today we're joined in the studio by a member of the European Parliament, Maria Ohisalo. Maria, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Today we're going to be talking about the EU's social policies. But before I do that, I want to frame a bit your political career because you've also worked on a variety of domestic issues ranging from inequality and housing to climate policy as well as internal security. Moving from your time on the domestic front to now the European front, how have you seen this debate evolve?
It's a great thing that now in the European Union level, we recognize housing as a European Union level problem and an issue that we need to tackle together because the underlying reasons are pretty much the same in many of the member states. The housing crisis is all over Europe. In some countries, let's say Finland, the country that I come from, it's not that bad. We have been managing the housing politics quite well. We are actually have been quite good on having this kind of a mixed model where you have private investments and you have affordable housing provided by the governments and local authorities. And then we even have some mixed models where you maybe pay something extra and then you get your rents a bit lower. And this mixed model has been working really well. We've also been able to tackle homelessness really well in Finland. And one of the key things here has been the housing first principle. So the idea, maybe a mind shift, that you don't wait for a person to first get rid of their, let's say, drug addiction or first get into the job. Because if you're on the street, it's not possible. You need a home and you need to build your life from there. So housing first literally gives you the home first and everything starts from there. And this is a good model where you actually, it is good from a human perspective. It recognizes housing as a human right, but it also is good from the economical point of view. It actually saves public money and spending. Because if a person doesn't have a home, it actually might happen that they go a lot to emergency rooms and shelters and all of that, and they're using services instead of building their own lives in their own places. So now coming to the European level, I'm really always pushing this housing first model to every country because it is something that I think everybody should learn from. We were nearly able to get rid of homelessness in our country. We're talking about literally 3,000, 4,000 people anymore. Of course, it is a lot of people, but compared to the size, the magnitude of the crisis in Europe, it is something. But as long as we don't, in the European Union level, recognize that the underlying reasons also often are, let's say, speculation in the housing market, financialization, where big companies come into the market, buy a big stock of the housing, short-term rentals, proliferation of that. Ordinary people don't have means they can't live in the city centers anymore. The same problem applies to my home country, Finland. Let's say up north, people know where Santa Claus comes from, Rovaniemi. That's a problem. People can't live in the city center. They can't work on tourism. They can't be as students in the city. Same problem happens, and we can see it in Lisbon, for example. So all over Europe. And now we do recognize the problems, that there is a crisis, but then in the political level, the solutions vary too much, and we don't end up in a situation where we would actually be able to tackle the crisis. Because I'm a part of the housing committee in the European Parliament. It is now only this short term that it's acting, and we're not able to solve housing crisis with one report. But for example, when we were negotiating that report, I had a problem that many were willing to tackle housing crisis only by saying that let's build more. It's not going to solve the crisis. We haven't seen any examples of that happening in any country, in any city, if it's only private investments coming into the market. But if there's no affordable housing, then ordinary people cannot live in those places. So, and then also the narrative was pretty much on that speculation is not a problem, or short-term rentals is not a problem. It's good for tourism. Obviously, it's good for tourism, but it's not always good for ordinary people living their everyday lives and wanting to go to work in the city centers. So this is the problem in the political level, that many people tend to speak about it nicely, but then when we come into the problems, we have different view on the problems and on the solutions too.
How to get there as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Well, I do want to as well speak about the context too, because right now we're seeing a lot more attention focused on defense and competitiveness. And perhaps there's a risk that social policy can fall back on the agenda or fall off of the agenda. So, how are you ensuring, or how does the parliament ensure that this is something that remains really prominent on the discussion?
I think it's about the EU as such, as a project where we need people's trust, the
Mhm.
social justification for the whole project. And if it feels like now when we look what Commission is, for example, proposing, it's a lot about simplification, making it better for the companies. I'm not against that,
Yeah.
but I'm against simplification which goes too far and meaning actually deregulation. It means often deregulating on workers' rights, on environmental issues, and so on. And if we only talk about defense issues, also important, but people's everyday lives, when they struggle on having the ends meet, let's say they don't have enough money to buy their or to pay their homes or to buy their food, to get the kids to proper hobbies or education. These are the problems the EU level should also bring solutions to, even though we know that it is often a member state's competence, that social policies, yes, they happen on national level, but for example, workers' rights, that is something that we need to regulate on the EU level because free movement of workers and free movement of people in general, that's one of the key principles of the whole European Union. And the idea that you would not protect the workers in the other country the same way you do it in another country, this is a problem.
Mm.
And then companies saying that this is too much burden. Well, if we don't have educated, well-being workforce around Europe, we are in trouble. And this is actually looking at the Draghi report, one of the biggest reports written on the EU competitiveness. You also need this social element as a really key element. And I'm personally very into a European Union that would be not only wider, as we talk about
Mhm.
enlargement, welcome Ukraine and many other countries, but also deeper when it comes to the topics and themes. So social political questions should definitely, in many cases, be more European Union level competence. And for example, we've seen the huge heat wave all across Europe.
Yes.
Here in Brussels, it's been terrible also. Temperatures rising near to 40 degrees. People working outside. Last week, actually, or this summer, the kindergarten of the parliament was closed in the middle of the day. I got a phone call just 2 minutes before I was stepping into a panel discussion on some event and then trying to organize everything. And so where do you get the workers if the services are lacking, if the people cannot work anymore? This closure actually happened because of the doctor saying that the workers cannot work anymore. It's too hot here.
Yeah.
And I'm actually a rapporteur in an INI report in the parliament, and we're now starting to write a report about extreme temperatures at work. It's not only about heat at work, it's also about extreme cold weathers at work. But we know, and especially now during the summer, it is here, everybody feels it, climate change, social justice, they come together. And this is a huge class question also. Um, People don't get killed by heat in the same way. If you are well enough to buy your air conditioning or a car that is air conditioned and you work in the office that is cool, it's not the same thing. If you work in a hospital that has no air conditioning, you work as a teacher, or you work outside in the construction sector or in the fields, agricultural sector, and so on. So these vital everyday life aspects are something that EU should tackle also, not only to speak on this level about competitiveness and simplification and so on.
Indeed, and we were just discussing that beforehand of feeling the heat
Mm.
wave, which I
Mm.
do think another one might be coming.
Yes,
So,
yes.
but we'll be keeping an eye out for the INI report, which
Mm.
you were addressing. I do want to speak a bit further, though, on what the Commission is planning to propose, namely the European Affordable Housing Plan in September. What does this plan need to deliver, according to you? Obviously, you've not seen it yet, in order to make a meaningful difference for Europeans.
We actually got already in December the first ever Commission Affordable Housing Plan, and now that will be followed by the Affordable Housing Act.
Mhm.
And nobody in the parliament has really a clue about the big content of the act, but we hope, of course, that it will bring into flesh what was promised in the Affordable Housing Plan in December. So they are saying that more investment should come into EU markets, and that would mean building more. Here again, I'm of course in line with building more, but also building good quality, taking into consideration the climate change, the heat. How do we build? What is the quality? Do we renovate the houses so that people really can live in the houses when it's 40 degrees outside and 35 inside? So now it's the time to tackle these things, and we as Greens are pushing really much for these renovations also. So answers to these questions, and of course, what is the affordability in the European Union level? If it's going to be only about social housing, which you might think then it's the specific groups having, let's say, the homeless people, people with disabilities, or elderly, students, or does the affordability also mean housing for a larger amount of people? We have problems with families going to work
Mhm.
and still they can't afford to live in our homes in European cities. So I would see a widening of the whole concept of affordability in general. And this is also something that Commission has promised to work on and fix the state aid rules so that that would make it possible to tackle the crisis more. And of course, from the Greens perspective, we have still issues on the speculation, financialization, the whole short-term rentals. There will be a new legislative proposal from the
Mhm.
Commission, so we're waiting for that. Of course, we want to give the local authorities the power to really regulate and even maybe make moratoria if there's a situation, let's say Lisbon, where you don't have anything else than Airbnbs in the city centers anymore. So maybe let's ban it for a while, or let's make some conditionalities there in order to help the regular people there. So these are some of the problems that are, and maybe also the homelessness issue. We are now having the council recommendation on housing exclusion, which is, of course, that is also the first time the council is doing a recommendation. Very good. Often the problem in the EU level tends to be that we're talking about strategies, plans, recommendations, but we're not talking about legally binding tools, or we're not talking enough about money. I always tend to say that we don't, for example, solve the climate crisis without legislation, without money. So we need investments in order to make this Affordable Housing Act reality also.
And you made me think of a lot of examples as you were mentioning this. Obviously, you mentioned Finland at the beginning. I know, for example, in Belgium, there's a lot of older homes and older apartments, particularly in Brussels. And there's now a pause on the renovation money that could go into green renovations, as well as France now cracking down on Airbnb as of May. So what I'm trying to get with this is how are you going to avoid a lot of fragmentation about how to address affordable housing, but also housing that needs to be renovated and also meeting the needs or the growing needs of society?
Yeah, if we look at the big crisis we have above us, it's not only the energy crisis resulting from, one of the reasons is the fossil energy prices and authoritarian regimes and leaders such as Putin having their wars. The big problem is that we as European Union are financing more of Putin's war than Ukraine in order to win the war, because we are still using Russian fossil energy. And what happened in Iran, Strait of Hormuz, for example, you get fossil fuel stuck in the Strait of Hormuz, but you don't do the same with renewable energy.
Yeah.
So this is definitely something that in order to make our societies more sustainable, sustainable on economical, social and environmental sense, we need to stop using fossil fuels and replace this with renewable energy. And this comes back to the housing, where we need to have renovations, the green renovations, in order for people to really also save money, because now people are struggling because of the price of the fossil energy and the crisis that the US war in Iran did and it affected. I think often we should be talking about security, economics, climate, all together. It forms like a triangle that we should be interested in, because we see that authoritarian regimes are also fueling their wars with fossil fuels. And we, as European Union, we're still too dependent on these regimes, whether it's Russia, whether it's China when it comes to electronics and chips and whatever, digitalization, or whether it's the US, which we had as our ally for a long time, and now the reality is different. So we need to build much more stronger, independent European Union, where we invest into this European Union, invest into European building. For example, let's say wooden buildings are a solution that can tackle at the same time the housing crisis, the climate crisis, and it brings security to people's everyday lives.
So you're mentioning with Putin and the spread of authoritarianism, but also on the other side, we're seeing a lot of fake news come out or fake messaging, which is prompting more anti-establishment parties or anti-establishment thoughts to spread out. Particularly on that, as Europe face more and more crises, we're seeing trust in institutions start to falter because citizens on the day-to-day level may not be seeing what they would hope from the local government, but also the EU government. So, what does the EU need to do differently if it really wants to rebuild trust in democracy as well as its social policies?
I think we have a larger breaking of liberal democracies ongoing. And this is from the extreme right-wing parties. This is fueled by Putin's also often also their funding, these authoritarian regimes who are playing together with far-right parties here in Europe. You can see Elon Musk coupling with German far-right and so on, and the big money coming together with extremists. I think people should see that the right-wing, far-right parties, they are not acting for people's good. They are acting for big money's good. These big companies, namely the big tech companies, they are not paying taxes, not at all the same amount as, let's say, the European companies. Most of them pay over 20% of taxes. These big tech companies, let's say, under 10%. So I'm very pro into EU having this digital digitech tax, for example. And this is something that now, when we're discussing about the multi-annual financial framework for EU for the next 7 years, we as Greens are pushing very much for this, and we actually got it already into the Parliament's statement and an opinion. And I hope the Commission also hears the message that this is the way forward, because we need to finance our social, environmental questions by something. And if we want to solve the European housing crisis, let's gather the money from the big techs and the ultra rich people, let's say, who are not paying their share right now.
Yeah.
And I think that would also bring the trust back, because right now it often feels like these big tech companies, we're just letting them come here, also distorting our democracies and rule of law in many cities. In many countries, you can also see that there has been an influence on election results, even when it comes to TikTok or X or these platforms. So we really need to tackle them much more.
We are getting a bit close to the end of our time, and I kind of want to circle back to what you mentioned at the very start of this, which was the example of housing in Finland, setting a bit of the bar of how a society could look like that eradicates homelessness. So on that, how can Europe learn from the Finnish model, how is that able to be applied across different member states, especially when so many cultures are different, as well as perceptions about the right to housing?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's exactly because I'm often talking about the housing as a human right and housing not as a speculative tool or housing not as a means to just make money. And we should really produce a common European understanding of this human rights aspect. And there we are still lacking behind. But I think there's a lot we can learn from Finland, and that's what I'm trying to also tell here to colleagues, that not only the mixed model where you actually also prevent segregation of areas when you build in same areas. Let's say we had these rules that you would build 30% of affordable housing, 30% of private, and the rest would be something in between, for example. Or then the housing first model, it is already known. We've seen research from it that it saves money, it saves human lives. People don't get heat strokes on the streets by living in the streets of Brussels or any other European cities, or let's say back up north where you have cold winters and so on. So it's about the human rights aspect, and it's also about economy. And maybe one thing in the political level is that political parties have understood that housing first can be something for every party. For, let's say, for the Greens, maybe the Social Democrats, it is the human rights aspect. For more right-wing parties, it has been the understanding of our streets being safe for everybody. People don't have to live on the streets anymore. Or the economical side, the right-wing parties have found this as an important aspect of it. So I think it is something for everybody. And that's why we should really produce it as a European model and try to. And there is, for example, FEANZA, an organization fighting homelessness in the European Union level, and they are really much pushing, and we are doing the work together, pushing for housing first principle to be applied all over Europe, that we would educate people to understand how the model works and really share the best practices. Because if EU something can do is sharing the best practices. And then, of course, on top of that, we would need legislation
Yes.
and funding and so on.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a high note to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Maria, for your
Thank
time today.
you. Thank you
It's a
very
pleasure
much.
to have you. And thank you to our viewers. Tune in next time for a view from Brussels.